Welcome to Ground Rules, Employment Law over your coffee break. My name's Pam Howland, and I'm here today with Doug Plass and Jennifer Walrath, and we have a special guest with us today. Welcome to Dr. Roger Hall. Roger is with Compass Consultation. He's a business psychologist, and he does peak performance mindset and leadership consultation for business owners and their teams. And I've had the privilege of getting to know Roger a little bit because Roger, Jennifer, and I are all in a group here locally called Provisors. So what I know from that is that in addition to all of that, Roger is also an author. He has multiple books. Maybe he'll tell us a little bit about those. He has his own podcast, and I know he's a keynote speaker too. So welcome to Roger.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be here today.
Yeah, we're super excited. This is going to be a fun topic. It's a little bit different than our normal kind of chunky legal concept discussion. But this is going to be fun and you're going to enjoy it. And I think you'll have some good tips and takeaways to take back to the workplace. So for those of you who know us and have been listening to Ground Rules, you know that Doug and Jennifer and I regularly are in court and representing employers as they defend employment law claims. And if you've heard us talk, we're frequently discussing how we feel our clients' frustration when they're entrenched in this battle that's stressful, expensive, time-consuming, and we want to magically wave a wand and make that lawsuit go away, but it just doesn't quite work that way. So once you're in a lawsuit and once you're battling it out, it's tough to make it go away. So we see that, and that kind of relates to why we've asked Roger to come. And the other piece of it is that we really do see the same mistakes made over and over again by leaders, by supervisors, by business owners. And from our perspective, it feels like a lot of those issues and mistakes that are being made that lead to lawsuits are somewhat easily avoidable through a little bit of proactive time and attention, whether it's training, whether it's getting a handbook, whether it's spending a little time on contracts and thinking through your agreements and the things that might lead to claims or lawsuits. So we always are asking ourselves, like, what holds people back? Like, it seems like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you just spend a little bit of time and attention doing these proactive things? But time and time again, what we see is that we see leaders not really investing in those things that could avoid a lawsuit altogether until they've had some kind of blow up or problem or claim or litigation. So what we're asking Roger to kind of help us noodle through here a bit is the role that emotion plays in decision making. And why is it that some leaders and business owners hold back and they don't really invest in what they need to do until it's too late, until they've had this emotional response and until things have blown up? So, Roger, with that framework, I'm going to hand it over to you and see, what your reaction is to that.
I think the reason that people delay on doing anything about protecting their company from employment lawsuits is not because they're irresponsible, but just simply because they're human. What you're asking them to do is something that goes against some of their habits. Human beings, and I'm stealing this from two theorists that will probably come back up again in our conversation. These two guys, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, in the 1970s and the early 1980s, were doing research on a thing called decision making under uncertainty, and it has evolved to become a discipline called judgmental heuristics. In economics, it's called behavioral economics. And what these two guys did was they were in Israel at the time, and they're sitting in this conference room by themselves, telling all these funny stories to each other about how people made really stupid decisions, and they would crack up. And so it was most of the day people walking past this conference room thinking, these guys get paid to sit around and smartass with each other, and what are they doing? Well, they founded with this sitting in the conference room telling funny stories to each other, why it is that people make what seemingly are irrational decisions. And unfortunately, Amos Tversky passed away in the 1990s. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in 2002 for his application of their work to economics. Now, this is all background, but what they looked at was how people make decisions when they're uncertain. And Kahneman he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he said essentially there are these two systems in your brain. One thinks fast and one thinks slow. And you can say that the fast system, which I'll roughly call the limbic system, the emotional system. And for neuroscientists out there, I know that's rough language. It's not very precise. So don't send me letters. But that fast system is the emotional system. The slow system is the cognitive system, the system where you're rationally thinking about things. And human beings typically make their decisions with the fast system. So when you're trying to persuade people and engage them in an attitude change or a behavior change, we typically think, oh, okay, we just got to tell them the reasons. We got to give them the logic for it because it's just so clear. And what we realize is that people are not logical at all. I mean, people are not rational; they're rationalizing, and so they're not only not rational, but they're emotional and they're also self-deceptive. And if you assume a different thing about people, you're always going to be disappointed. So if you think, okay, they're going to make decisions that are kind of irrational, so and they're going to lie to themselves about these decisions, then how do we co-opt all that to help them to make good decisions? So when I was in graduate school, there's a parallel theory that people in the business say ran parallel to Kahneman and Tversky's work. And I did research as a research assistant for a year on this model of attitude change. And it was these two theorists called John Petty. It was Petty and Cacioppo. So it was actually Richard Petty, not the race car driver, and John Cacioppo. And they said there are certain arguments that are logical and rational. And they said they called them central route processes, which is like thinking slow. And so you as lawyers, you lay out your reasoning and you tell people the pros and cons and you think they're going to make their decisions that way. That would be what they would call central route processing. So we typically thought that when people make important decisions, they make those important decisions by rational means. But superficial decisions they would make more emotionally or with appeals to authority or appeals to things that don't seem to make sense. And they call that the peripheral route. So if you're going to talk about making a decision about avoidance of a lawsuit, we've got to come up with these logical, rational arguments. But if you're going to decide whether you're going to have Sprite or 7-Up, well, it doesn't really matter. So you can make all of these, you can have, you don't have to have you have Shaquille O'Neal advertised for Sprite. You don't have somebody say, we've done the research and research says Sprite is better than 7-Up. And here are the 47 reasons. Nobody's going to expend that kind of mental energy on Sprite versus 7-Up. And so I was part of a research project where we looked at organ donation, which is I think, kind of an important decision. You die. Do you want to donate your organs to other people? And you have to make that decision ahead of time. And we thought logical, rational reasons. People are dying every day, and there's this many organs that need to be donated, and there's this deficit, and the person, they're not going to kill the person to get their organs, and they're not, all of these logical, rational things. And what we realized is that people don't make decisions about things like organ donation on logical, rational. So we made this recommendation that the way the peripheral route or the fast thinking works is you have them make the decision at a time of convenience when there is a time pressure, using an appeal to an authority, and make it as convenient as possible. And so these were our recommendations. So what we said is, if you want to get people to increase organ donation, that as they're standing in line at the DMV, you should have a videotape with the Surgeon General in uniform. It has to be in uniform because that's an appeal to an authority. Right before they're about to make this decision, say, it's very important to donate organs. And it doesn't really matter what the Surgeon General says. I mean, the Surgeon General could say it's important to donate organs because it's important to donate organs, because they're not thinking about this in a deep way. They just have to have the message come out. And then within 30 seconds, the person at the DMV says, would you like to donate your organs? Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, seems like a good idea to me. So that was our recommendation. I moved on with my life. I went in another direction in my career. 15 years later, I'm in the DMV, and I'm waiting in line. Honest to goodness, there is a life-size cardboard cutout of Shaquille O'Neal with an organ donation card. And he's, I donated organs. You should too. And I think to myself, your organs won't fit in anybody's body. I mean, you're twice as big as anybody. So how's that going to work? But that's a subject for another day. And maybe somebody read our paper, which is you need a superficial appeal to authority, Shaquille, not giving really logical, rational reasons, but it's right before the decision happens. So as you're looking, what are the ways that you can co-opt an appeal to an authority, specious arguments done right ahead of time when somebody has to make a decision with a very low hurdle? Okay, the higher the hurdle, the more effort it takes. And I feel like I'm monologuing, but I want to say this one other thing. Kahneman and Tversky said that human beings are mental misers. It's a very polite way of saying we're intellectually lazy. But there's a reason for that. Research by a guy named Roy Baumeister has shown us that thinking is actually very calorically intensive. I mean, we're burning tons of calories. So anytime we have to think hard, it's physically exhausting. So just quick little trivia. Our brain occupies between 2 and 5% of our body mass, 2 and 5% of our body mass, but it consumes between 20 and 25% of the fuel in our food. So just sitting at your desk thinking burns 25% of the calories that you consume in a day. So asking a person to think harder is actually effortful, and people avoid it. Not because they're bad people, but that's a way for our bodies to conserve energy so that we can use it for other things. So we get into these mental habits so that we don't have to think. That's helping us stay at stasis. So if you want to persuade someone, appeal to authority, specious arguments that don't have to think very hard, low hurdle, right at the time that the decision needs to be made. So there, I've just thrown a lot out there.
I just wrote down bring snacks.
Yeah, I was writing, we're somewhere in between organ donation and Sprite. Yeah.
Actually, I think your decisions are more important than organ donation, because after you're dead, you don't care. And that's usually the rationale. But when you're alive and somebody's suing you, yeah, you really care. And snacks are important. There was actually a study that's really widely disseminated that in Israel they had people doing parole hearings, and so they had judges doing parole hearings, and these are people who had done something. They were in prison and they were coming up for parole, and what they found is that right before lunch, the rate of being paroled was about 10%. But after a protein rich lunch, judges began to parole people at the rate of about 65% because their brain had enough fuel. Because here's what happens: coming up for parole, you look at it, you're mentally spent, and what's the default? The default is leave them in jail. I'll think about it later. But when you have fuel for your brain, then it's, oh, you have enough brain power to actually make the decision. And so snacks are important, especially protein rich snacks. Donuts, not as good, because you're going to get a peak of decision making followed by an insulin crash, and then people can't think for anything.
This made me think about about what is good writing, right? So we're lawyers, so we have to do legal writing, and you have to lay out the facts and engage the cognitive part. But like really good writing engages emotional responses as well, right? And like trying to be clever in how you do that.
Yes.
And I just think that's really interesting when we're talking about these kind of two systems in decision making. And we all think that if we have all the facts laid out, we should get things decided on the merits. But in reality, there's all these other emotional things going on in people's minds, and whether or not they've eaten and all this sort of stuff.
Well, because human beings are integrated creatures. Our thinking is dependent on an organ, the brain, which is dependent on fuel, which is dependent on our bodies. So, I want to make sure. Yeah, it was Descartes. He talked about the mind and the body, and he created this mind and body dualism, which has been a shortcut people have used for the last 400 or 500 years, which is just wrong. I mean, the mind and the body are integrated. There's not an either or. So yes, and our emotions. And things that happen outside of our awareness consume so much activity of our brain that to ignore those in decision making is to ignore many of our ways of knowing. What you're talking about with facts versus stories and funny is about memory. It's how do you retrieve from memory important information. So there's semantic memory. Who was the 5th president of the United States? Who's the 13th president of the United States? I don't know. But if you ask somebody to remember a story, they will absolutely remember it. And so if it's funny, if it rhymes, in law, Johnny Cochran. I mean, you all agree.
You must quit.
If the glove doesn't fit, you must quit. I mean, the guy was a genius because he made a mnemonic, a rhyme, so that all of the juries would bring that memory up. And so part of the job of anyone who's in the persuasion business, and you lawyers are in the persuasion business, is how do you bring it to top of mind? And facts bore, stories soar. See, I rhymed there. See what I did?
I was just thinking as you were talking, I mean, part of the underlying premise, I think, if I'm understanding this, is that when people are making decisions with their fast side, right? Yeah. They may make decisions that are not the most rational of decisions or the best decisions. Okay, yes. Well, and I guess best is relative. But my question is there anything out there that weighs in on the question, does self-awareness help or change things, right? Like if you are, as a decision maker, aware of this tendency, to make decisions in this way, does it impact the way in which you make decisions?
Oh, absolutely. If I'm self-aware, do you think that will make... So I'm going to back up. I'm going to say those are two different things, which is rational and good decisions. You made those as the same thing, and they're not. So as we look at decision making, there's a good deal of research that people who are unaware of the emotional component of their decision making actually make worse decisions than those who are aware of it. So there are certain lesions that can happen in people's brains, or certain conditions that occur that shut down emotional awareness. And those people tend to make awful decisions. And so our emotions actually act as the guardrails to keep our decisions effective. You know, there's a fairly famous example. There's an anti-Parkinson's drug that you give to people, and it helps with their tremors. The side effect is it eliminates the feeling of guilt. Well, so you've got, Grandpa, who's always been really, thrifty. I mean, he's down at the riverboats now, gambling all of his life savings away, and Grandma's on the stripper pole. I mean, these are real stories that families are saying, my mom is behaving in ways that she would be ashamed of. Well, the shame went away. So she's making decisions without emotions. Dad's spending all of his money. Yeah, because he doesn't experience regret. So the idea that, Mr. Spock on Star Trek, is it logical, Captain Kirk? I mean, that he's making the good decisions. Actually, he's not. So I'll give you an example. You want to buy a car. There's two ways to buy a car. There's the consumer reports guy, right? He reads consumer reports. He finds out lowest insurance rates, replacement costs, theft rates, all of these things. And he decides on a 4-door Toyota Camry blue, because he found out blue is the color of cars that get the fewest speeding tickets. And he gets the mid-trim line because he knows resale on the high trim line isn't going to be that much more. So he gets a 4-door Toyota Camry in blue, mid-trim line. So he sends out emails to 7 car dealers, says, here's my car, give me the highest trade-in, lowest price, whoever gets the best price gets the deal. Now, we'll all say that's a rational decision, perhaps compulsive, perhaps very time-consuming. Then there's the other guy who's driving down the street, and he's like, ooh, that's a pretty car. And he pulls in, he goes, I want that car. And the guy, would you like to test drive it? Nope. He goes, I know I want it. And he goes, okay. And so he gets the same deal. He gets the same 4-door, mid-trim line, blue Toyota Camry for the same price, same trade-in. Who's made the better decision? The outcome is the same, but the process is different. Now, everyone will say that the second guy made an impulsive, emotional decision, and that the first guy made a rational decision. And here's what I will argue against, is the first guy absolutely made an emotional decision. And the emotional decision is, I want to avoid regret. So all of his decision-making was designed to avoid an emotional state. And so that's the world you guys are dealing in. How do we help people want to avoid regret? It's still an emotional decision.
Interesting. I'm just thinking about how thoroughly I plan my vacations. I want to avoid regret.
I was thinking about my last car purchase. I'm more the impulsive, like, let's do it, but no regret.
No, yeah. So if you think, okay, most of the way people make decisions, and good decisions envelop the use of emotion, then you're far more likely to initiate change. If it's just rational, if it's just data, it's not enough. But here's the problem with the law is you folks terrify people. I mean, if somebody was to walk in here today with a summons, a court summons, you guys would look at it and you'd toss it aside. If a regular citizen gets a court summons, they panic, they lose sleep, they don't know what to do. And so the emotional valence that you experience interacting with court appearances and summons and lawsuits, this is your daily bread. And so you're so used to it. Everyone else, they get too much fear. And what we know is that if and we'll talk about animals, if you want to paralyze an animal from reacting to a fearful stimulation, create overwhelming fear and the perception of being trapped. Those are the two criteria. I have anxiety and I can't eliminate it. I'm trapped.
Sounds like a lawsuit.
So you've got people who are amped up on fear. It paralyzes them. In my business, we call that not panic. We call it negative panic, because panic is running around. Ah! Negative panic is shutting down completely. And that's what happens when people have anxiety, an anxiety-provoking event, and don't see a way out. They feel trapped.
So what advice do you have then with all this in mind, thinking through the fast decision-making systems, the role emotion plays, timing? What advice do you have for business leaders on how to accurately appraise risk with all of this in mind? How do you keep it in check to make good decisions?
Well, good decisions is about the outcome and not the process. So the outcome is to make a good decision. The process may be really different than the way you view it. So I would say, to make a good decision, you as lawyers, how do we make this more top of mind, but not so anxiety provoking that they don't feel that there's a way out? So that there's it comes to mind more easily. And when it comes to mind, there is an easy, quick solution to their problem. I'm just throwing out ideas that you have a handbook in a box. You do this, and I'll call it your gateway drug. It's your way to connect with people, so that they feel like, okay, I've done something. But then you have to keep it top of mind so that they keep thinking, how do I do more? And so there has to be a story. There has to be a story and this is the easy way that they solved it. Someone like you, here's the easy story. This is how they solved it. Because human beings don't remember events equally. We remember and we create our ideas of importance based on the ease of remembering something or the context in which we remember it. So I'll ask you all a question. What's the most likely way you are going to die at the beach? Just call it out. Drowning. Excellent answer. Incorrect.
Heart attack.
Heart attack. That is the correct answer. The correct answer is heart attack, because you're more likely to, and of course a lawyer says that, you're more likely to die of a heart attack anywhere. But what I've done is I've said at the beach, so I've directed your attention to start thinking about what are the available examples of death at the beach: drowning, heat stroke, stingray, shark attack, all of those things. But the reality is, baseline is heart attack. So part of what you need to do is direct people's attention to context and make it top of mind, because human beings, our memory is like the junk drawer in your kitchen. So whatever is frequently or recently accessed is on top. So what's on the top of the junk drawer in your kitchens?
Oh, you wouldn't want to see my junk drawer. Like rubber bands, paper.
Yeah, maybe a screwdriver, rubber bands, paper clips. Probably a screwdriver, right? Okay, so that's what's been most recently or most frequently put on the top So what's in the back of your junk drawer? You have no idea. You haven't been to the back of your junk drawer in years.
Napkins. I don't have a very big junk drawer.
Okay.
And she moved recently.
And you moved
too,
recently.
so,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's the way our memory works. Whatever's at the top of our mind is what we pull out. And what we do is, because it's available, we tend to overestimate its frequency. So we do this. Whatever car you drive or whatever car you're currently lusting after, have you ever noticed how there's another one. Oh, they're everywhere. Okay, because it's top of mind because that's the car you drive. You see them everywhere. I'm trying to think of a Ford Edge. I think that's a car. I don't know what they look like. I don't ever see them because I've never driven in one of them, never ridden in one of them. But I see my car everywhere. And so that's what happens with the availability heuristic. We overestimate its frequency. So with people who are looking at unlikely events, like the unlikeliness that you're going to be sued for an employment thing, they look in their memory and what do they see? Nothing. And so they represent that as this is the common experience. And you all know they're gambling, right?
Yes.
But what's interesting about this for me is that you talk about a good decision is a good outcome, right? If you never buy car insurance and you never get pulled over and never get in an auto accident, you made a good decision.
You made a great decision. Yeah.
Right? So I think we're not necessarily talking about good decisions or bad decisions for everybody. We're talking about cautious decisions, right?
Well, see, so what you're trying to do is the avoidance of regret.
Right.
You're not looking for hedonism. You're looking for regret avoidance. So part of the emotion to play on is, okay, what are the regrets? Think about what you might lose, what you could lose, but make sure the costs are not so great that they feel overly anxious and paralyzed. Because if they're overly anxious and no escape, they won't act.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how sometimes we'll, as part of our training, tell stories about here's what can go wrong if you don't do this. And we've had people say before, well, those seem like scare tactics. But what's funny is, as you were talking about, maybe focusing more on a story of what goes well or what can happen, what goes right. There's no story there. That's what's funny is it's a really boring outcome. It's and then nothing. They just kept doing their business because they never got the claim, right? Or there was no lawsuit.
And nobody had to call us because there wasn't a problem.
We never heard from them. Right. Yeah.
There's that middle story, and I think that's the one maybe to focus on, which is we hear about houses that burn down, and everybody has fire extinguishers, but very few of us have a story about I had a small fire, I used a fire extinguisher, and I was okay. That's the story to tell. Right. I had a small fire. I had a fire extinguisher right there. Yeah, the oil caught on fire on the stove, and I got the fire extinguisher. I said, man, it's a pain to clean up, but boy, I'm really glad it didn't get out of hand. That's the story to tell.
So my employee came to me with something, and I knew how to handle it.
And I knew how to handle it. Yes. And so people, when people can imagine success, that puts that top of mind. And boy, it could have been really bad, but because I did whatever.
Yeah, I like it. Well, I think those are all helpful tips. And I think there's some application for that, for not just us, not just the lawyers out there who are trying to counsel their clients on why they should take some proactive measures to make sure they don't ever get the middle fire, right? Where they even have to get the fire extinguisher, like how they can avoid it altogether. But I think we also could see some application for this with people, maybe HR professionals, people in a business trying to convey to others, this is worth our time, it's worth our effort. These are good things that, we should take the time now to proactively address to avoid problems down the road. So thinking through, some of the regret avoidance, the emotional response, and how all that factors into our rapid decision making. Those are good ideas. I like it. Any other thoughts before we sign off?
Let me talk about what I call the gambling man fallacy. And so we use this as a home example. If a person has a piece of bad news to tell their spouse, there's a calculation that happens in their head. So I'm a man. I'll use my perspective. So I have a piece of bad news to tell my wife, or a hard discussion to have with her, and I think to myself, if I tell her this, there's 100% chance she'll be 50% mad. But if I don't tell her, there's a 90% chance she'll be 0% mad because she'll never find out. And there's a 10% chance she'll be 100% mad. And you know where everybody goes?
90% chance that
She'll never find out.
out.
Yeah, so they take the gamble. And so if you can couch it in a way that, there's a 90% chance this will never happen to you. But if it does, they're going to be 100% mad. So let's have this difficult discussion now so again, back using the fire extinguisher analogy, that we got the fire extinguisher out, we solved the problem. But human beings don't like confrontation. They don't like the anxiety it creates. They don't like the negative emotion it creates. So they avoid it, which is why they hire you. So you can step in and have the conflict for them. So I think recognizing that people will always choose that stasis so that their brains don't have to think more. And if you can just bring it to top of mind, they're far more likely to act on it if it's easy to remember and they see an easy way to resolve the problem.
I like it. That's good stuff. Well, tell us a little before we sign off, just because our audience has heard us talk a bunch about our books. So tell us a little bit about your books. I know you're an accomplished author. You have a handful. Tell us a little bit about those what you've got in the works out there.
For asking. So I have a leadership guidebook called Expedition, which just became available on Amazon. It was the way it used to be formatted was not Amazon friendly. So Expedition is now available on Amazon. And it's a guidebook. You can self-direct, or I've used this for probably the last 19, 18 years with my clients to help them go through that leadership journey. The next book is called Staying Happy, Being Productive, The Big 10 Things Successful People Do. And over the course of my career, I've had the good fortune of working with and watching the lives of very successful people, some financially successful, all of them interpersonally and purpose successful. So it's not just about money. And I saw habits that they had that they paid attention to. So I started documenting those over the years, and I came up with 10. I thought I should stop. But now that the Big Ten has, I think, 16 schools, I'm going to add 6 more. So that's the second book. The third book is called DIY Brain, and it's the Mindset Makeover Manual. And in it is describing how you can change your own mind. How do you become self-aware and then able to control your thinking? And it's all stories that will help you to do that. The next book is DIY Leader Brain, and this is the neurobiology of how humans interact and how leaders can influence other people and what happens in their brains when that happens. I'm about halfway done with that one.
Well, we'll be on the lookout for it. That's great. I would imagine our audience would have a lot of use for those concepts. So that's good stuff. Well, thank you.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be invited.
Yeah, greatly appreciate your time and input. And for those of you listening, if you're looking for an easy solution as to how to stay out of court and to avoid claims and lawsuits, check out our book, Law for Leaders. We also have a live training coming up on June 18 for supervisors. That's here locally in Boise. And then, of course, we have our Law for Leaders training that's virtual, recorded. We've got some in-person. Those are all out there. And then the easy fix. Roger was telling us about the super easy, immediate fixes, right? You can listen to our podcast, low time commitment, and there's a lot of other resources out there. We've got the SHRM email blast, the EEOC email blast. There's a lot of options if you're looking to get your employment law house in order. It doesn't have to be time consuming or expensive. You just need to give it a little bit of thought and energy. And we're happy to help doing that.
And eat snacks while you read the email blast.
That's right. Yep. That's it for now. So we'll see you next time on Ground Rules. Ground Rules hosts and guests are not providing legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction.